This is the Innovatiewasstraat. In English, we call it the Innovation Car Wash. The podcast where you can learn the ins and outs of innovation. I'm Kim Spinder, and I help organizations fast-track innovation with new and exciting ways of working together. In our series of podcasts, I have the chance to ask innovation pioneers about the changes we can make today and jumpstart tomorrow.
We're in a massive A/B test. So at the very least, every manager and every organization should be saying, what worked better before COVID? What's working better now? And let's actually learn from those. Let's have that conversation explicitly rather than implicitly.
Today, I'm speaking with Tony Crabbe, author of the book Busy and his latest book, Busy at Home, an essential toolkit for life and work during lockdown. Tony works with companies such as Microsoft and Disney. In this podcast, we will be talking about how we can use this unique time we are living in to reimagine how we work. We'll explore topics like the power of sloppiness and the challenges of working at home when it comes to innovation and creativity. You can find the show notes for this podcast at innovatiewasstraat.com/podcast. So Tony, it's only 11 in the morning. But what are the top 3 things for you so far today?
Top 3 things. Take my daughter to Alice's house. She's been bugging us for a while. So anyway, so as soon as I finish this, I'm taking her over there. I'm jet washing the drive. These probably aren't the things you were thinking I was going to do. And then I've got a call with some CVPs from Microsoft later on today, where I'm discussing an event. But yeah, today's sort of a semi-not work day. I tend to kind of these weeks in the summer, I tend to ease out of the week on Friday.
Yeah, and why do you think it's so important to ask this question?
Well, look, I talk a lot about the big 3, and I think that one of the things that became clear to me in some of the projects I've done is I've talked a lot in Busy around, we've got to really focus on our values, on our big priorities. And then I noticed I came across what I call the translation problem, which is a lot of people were very clear of their annual priorities, their values, but it didn't necessarily translate into daily action. So I think actually spending time often for people at the end of a week, just thinking, okay, what are my big 3 things I want to move forward this week? And that can be work or life, is a good way of inserting some of that stuff into the moments of choice between meetings, between conversations.
Yes. So in this context of Corona and never waste a good crisis, how are you using the current Corona crisis to bring innovation into your work?
It's been really interesting. One of the things that, for years, a lot of the work I've been doing has been, we've been doing in-person events and kind of, obviously I'm a speaker, and I've been designing a lot of events for companies around the world to be delivered by leaders, but often they were in person, or you could do it virtually. One of the things the Corona crisis has really brought home to me is I didn't really understand how to virtual, engaging experience. And so actually learning how to recreate experiences virtually has been a great learning thing. And also, quite frankly, learning how to work with children at home has been interesting.
So what is your experience with the online collaboration? Do you notice some advantages of in-person meetings versus online meetings? So, look, there's a few things. I think and all the research points to this, that we can often be more efficient on online meetings. We tend to get into, if you think about how you turn up to a face-to-face meeting, there's a bit of chat, there's a bit of, how you do, how was your weekend? We don't really do that to the same level on an online meeting. And so, and there's a lot of research that shows there's a kind of
an emotional distancing that can happen if we're not careful, if we're not intentional in online meetings. So I think part of it is just building some of the things that would happen naturally in in-person conversations intentionally into it. So building check-ins in, building a chance to connect is really important. But there are also some advantages of online meetings because there's often the chat open. So, one of the things I've found can be nice is if you set up online meetings well, they can be more inclusive than some of the face-to-face ones, because actually people who are maybe quieter can actually, contribute with the chat, and then you can bring them in, so there are definite benefits if we're intentional about recognizing the stuff that they don't do as well, which is the human connection. So actually build a bit more human connection in, but then lean into some of the stuff that actually allows more voices to be heard more evenly. I find it levels the playing field. So that's a really good thing.
And this is a good moment for the introvert people, right?
Yeah, well, it can be. But I mean, although one of the things that I'm picking up already in a lot of companies is, and maybe driven by some extroverts, but there's a lot of people who end up spending their whole days in back-to-back meetings, even more than normal, because people are just, and I think part of it is we want to be seen to be working. It's that sort of, if you've worked in an office all your life, that's a kind of weird tension. So we kind of arrange more and more meetings, which clearly isn't overly helpful. But also there's a factor for the deep extroverts. There's something called social facilitation, which is a concept which is we work better. I mean, this is seen in sport, it's seen in business as well. We work better when we feel someone's noticing us. It kind of gives our work meaning. And so some of the extroverts I've been working with have actually, what they've started to do is, even while they're working on their own projects, they'll set up a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting in the background with colleagues, and they're all just getting on with their own individual work, but the feeling that their work has more meaning because they're being observed. So I think, again, it's, my son's a deep introvert, and I'm a deep extrovert. So I've been arranging kind of coffees. I have a monthly tea break with a friend in England who I'm not seeing at the moment. And yeah, he's reveling in the fact that he's on his own all the time. So yeah, it's just playing with, just recognizing your needs and making sure you have them met.
Yeah, and pre-corona, showing up at the office was also important, for example, to get a promotion. And now people end up in non-stop online meetings. But it's also a little bit about the difference between performance and achievement. What's for you the difference?
Yes. Yeah, so that's a great question. And one of the things that has been concerning me, and it's been coming up more and more in some of my conversations with companies. I was in a meeting recently with one of the big telcos in Ireland, and they're saying that they're actually struggling to get even their managers focused on longer term stuff and creativity, because they're so in kind of crisis management and where some of that gets driven from is, Carol Dweck, her earlier work before she produced Growth Mindset, talked about the difference between a performance motivation and an achievement motivation. Performance is all about, wanting to keep people happy, being seen to perform, if you like, demonstrations of performance, showing up, to use your words. Achievement motivation is focusing on what's going to be the best thing for the business, for the company, for the customer, for my family. And they drive different things. You tend to take more risks and are more willing to make trade-offs if you've got achievement motivation. And of course, none of us are static. We approach different situations with more of a performance orientation or more of an achievement orientation. And I've no evidence or substantial evidence to back this up yet, but I'm seeing from the comments that come in a bit of a spike of performing motivation coming in, where people are feeling more pressure to demonstrate that they're working, to demonstrate their value. And that's to be challenged by managers.
Yeah. And this time, maybe this is also a time to reimagine how we work. Do you have tips for organizations to encourage that?
Well, the starting point is actually just put it on the agenda. I talk a lot about Booking.com. And they do this A/B testing, and I know they just, they do A/B testing all the time, and we're in a massive A/B test. So at the very least, every manager and every organization should be saying, what worked better before COVID? What's working better now? And let's actually learn from those. Let's have that conversation explicitly rather than implicitly. Because obviously the big risk is we all just drift back into some of the bad habits we had before. And a lot of people are saying, no, it's not going to happen. But it will happen because our habits are very context dependent unless we take the time to do it. And, in organizations, how natural is it for us to spend time just reflecting? We get so busy kind of doing. So actually, as a manager, as a leader, just putting the question on the table and saying, okay, this is our opportunity. Everything's a bit different. What do we want to achieve out of that? And some of it has been, in some of the organizations, there has been a lot of agility and creativity that I'm working with because, quite frankly, customers are demanding different things. Employees are saying, well, wait a minute, I can't work in that way because necessity has driven a lot of that. And so it's just making sure that we build those conversations into our daily rhythm. One of the things I talk about is there's a real opportunity. There's something called psychological distance, which is this, when we lean back from in our chair, problems don't seem so difficult because we got a bit of distance. And we all have a bit of distance from the kind of the crazy buzz of the office at the moment. And finding a way to actually use that intentionally. And actually, as a manager, ask a question like, look, if we all sit back and we think about, what's most important for our customers at the moment, or what are we doing at the moment that just no longer makes sense? Or questions like this that just prompt that and put it on the agenda on a regular basis. And then you'll find people will really recognize the need to innovate, but also grasp the opportunity.
Yeah, well, I have a personal question because I'm such a pleaser. So it's easy for me to dive into what's in front of me. And I find it difficult to say no and to zoom out, like you told. Do you have a tip for me?
The people pleaser, I'm a people pleaser too. And the thing that I talk about my kind of rules of 350s. So, because we have to start with the conversation with ourselves. We often kind of obsess about what the conversation will be like with the other person, but it has to start with the conversation ourselves. So the first 50 I remind myself of is that, whenever the thing I often do when it comes to people pleasing, the first thing that goes through my head is, oh yeah, I can probably do it. And my belief that I can probably do it kind of overwhelms my desire to, I think, well, that'll avoid me having to have that difficult conversation. And the reality is that's not the way. We overestimate what we can do by about 50%. So I have to remind myself of that. The second thing is we overestimate or underestimate rather how likely it is someone will say yes. So again, we know that we underestimate. If you think going to ask someone a question, we underestimate by 50% how likely it is they're going to say yes. So again, I have to remind myself, actually, it's quite hard for them to say no. It's hard for me to ask, to ask, but it's hard for them to say no to my request. And then the third thing is just remember that when we just explain our reasons, it increases our likelihood of them saying yes by 50%. So the starting point is start with yourself. Recognize that no is not a negative act, that actually, and we're saying no because we're saying a big yes to something else that's more important, something connected to our values or our family, else we want to do. But people pleasing is a challenge a cross I bear through life, along with you, but and many people. But those are the conversations we need to lean into.
I also find the example of the not-to-do list from Adam Grant very inspiring, and the story you wrote about Warren Buffett, who advised Mike Flynn what he shouldn't do at any cost. Can you tell something about that story?
Yeah, so the to-don't list from Adam Grant, I just think it's just a super simple idea. As you probably know, I'm not a huge fan of to-do lists. I think to-do lists have been people have put too much faith in to-do lists, and it's always small things that go on there, and it drives people towards the small stuff as opposed to the big three. But a to-don't list, remind yourself of the stuff that you're not going to do, I think it can be really valuable. When it comes to Warren Buffett, it's just a beautiful example of a trade-off. And it's he asked his pilot, or his pilot asked, he asked his pilot what his goals were in life, and he came up with a whole bunch of them. And then he said, right, okay, so what are your top 5? And he worked out his top 5. And then he said, right, now look really hard at the items, your life goals, if you like, that are not in your top 5, and do everything you possibly can to avoid doing any of those. And the point of that is trade-offs are never about things that are unpleasant or are unvaluable. The hard trade-offs are going to be the things that actually are really appealing, are really attractive. But what Buffett was saying is actually these things that are appealing but aren't quite the key things that you want to do with your life or achieve are the things that are going to be your biggest distractors, your most powerful distractors, because they're appealing. So it's just recognizing, I might want to play golf. I quite fancy the idea of playing. We actually live, my granddad was a great golfer. We can see a golf course in the distance. And yet I've chosen not to play golf because it's 5 hours or 4 hours out of my day, and that none of my family are interested in golf. So it's super appealing, and yet I don't do it because actually it contradicts values that are more important to me. I put a question in the book. If I'm saying yes to this, what am I saying no to?
Yeah.
Which is a question I quite frankly stole from Michael Bunjeh-Stanier, who's a brilliant kind of coaching, an author and a kind of coaching guru. It's one of his questions. He calls it the strategic question. And it's just a really nice question to remind us, as always, when we say yes to something, we are actually saying no to something else. And what is that? Yeah.
And it also reminds me of doing nothing is also very hard. So it's hard to simply do nothing. And I wondered, is that the reason you get away to your boat every year?
Yeah, this year we can't go.
Yeah.
This year we can't go because of the crisis. We just don't feel it's sensible, and we're possibly going to go back into lockdown here in Spain. We're landlocked this year, but no, it's what it is. I mean, I think the kind of moments of one of the things that's lovely about the boat is it only goes 5 miles an hour. It's very old. It's wooden. And we're 5 of us in a fairly confined space. And we always find the first week or so are quite tricky because we're just all of a sudden gone from a house to a boat, and we're kind of in each other's way. And then the rhythm builds in, and you get into a rhythm, and life at 5 miles an hour is nice. It kind of forces you to, some of the motoring we do, we're motoring sort of 4 hours. I'm just standing at a wheel for 4 hours. And so in a funny way, doing nothing isn't, I talk a lot about doing nothing. Doing nothing sort of isn't what I do. It's more doing very little. So as an example, driving a boat at 5 miles an hour, there's really, all you're doing is just sort of looking at things, every now and then checking dials, but really you're not doing very much. But it allows the brain, because you're doing something very, very small, it allows the brain to drift. Gardening is something else I've got into recently, or kind of, and just sort of low level activity, whether it is wonderful. And I think one of the things that we all find, because a boat is there's less to do on a boat in terms of there's lots of stuff that you can do in a house, and when you got gardens, there's always jobs. There are fewer jobs on a boat. And so it drives us to do more fishing. It drives us to do more ambling and, so it's a wonderful time. We also see a lot of family when we're there, which is also nice. But yes, the doing nothing or doing very little is a big appeal of the boat.
It sounds better than sitting still on a chair for an hour and go crazy.
Yes.
So doing little is maybe better for a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's. I talk about doing a Darwin. Darwin used to just go for long, gentle walks after he did a period of writing. And from a creative perspective, I think I often when I'm doing my writing, I'll often be, up pretty early, do some exercise, and then kind of work, and do a lot of thinking for the first sort of 3-4 hours. But then I'll just go for a bit of a walk up the hill behind me. And it's that kind of, and I've found that if I walk too fast, it's not useful. It's exercise, not reflection. But if I amble, I'm not sure how the word translates in Dutch, amble. It's sort of a slow walk with lots of gazing around. Not a purposeful walk, a kind of almost a purposeless walk. But when I do that, I notice more, but also I just come up with better ideas. So I think it's the low intensity of the activity that allows the brain that liberates the brain.
Yeah, I find myself always when I'm on a walk, then I'm just thinking, I can listen to a podcast. That's more efficient. So how do you resist that urge to do something else with a walk?
No, I know. And look, but that was one of my insights when I wrote the first book, Busy, because you can imagine when you're writing a book that you just think, if I only read one more book, or if I only kind of listened to one more podcast or one more TED Talk, I might have that killer idea that's going to really make the book good. And so you get into this. And as you know, typically in life, I travel a lot. And that's been one of the wonderful things for me about the lockdown. I've not gone into an airport since late February. And that's unheard of for me. But I was using a lot of my travel time for consuming podcasts, but reading books, whatever. And of course, that's still important, and growth is one of my core values. But I also learned that just creating time to not consume those was really important. So I find it easiest to anchor it in particular moments. So it's kind of like, so the latest, one of my children call it a midlife crisis. I went out and bought a big strimmer, a big powerful strimmer for kind of cutting weeds and stuff. My power tool, they call it. Anyway, but so I'll say, look, and I could do that with headphones on and listen to stuff. But actually, I find strimming is a kind of really good way of just me processing stuff. It might be on a drive to the airport. I never listen to podcasts on drives to the airport anymore because I just find that as a really good digest. So almost pre-committing and anchoring a kind of a period or an activity that you're going to do as a chance just to be present with yourself, to allow your brain to wander is probably the way, rather than just squeezing it into your day generally.
Do you want to go back to the traveling, or are you more like maybe a little bit less? Is there something changed during Corona?
Well, that's one of my big hopes. Yeah. And look, I mentioned I'm an extrovert. I would be lying if I said I don't enjoy much more giving a keynote or a workshop in person than doing it virtually. There's a richness of the human interaction that I really enjoy, and you can respond real time then to people's reactions, and so I find that very energizing. I do like travel, but yes, one of my big hopes is that there will be that I'll be able to structure my work in a way that I can travel a fair bit less and do quite a bit more virtually. I'm pretty confident that's going to happen. So yeah, and look, who wouldn't want to? One of the other hopes is that I travel less, but Dulcie, my wife, comes with me more. The children are getting a bit older, and we've talked for a while about saying, well, why don't we make these into fun trips as well? And so and I think we've probably talked about that quite a lot. I think, like many people through Corona, when you can't go anywhere, the holiday adverts or the travel shows on TV become more exciting, don't they? I mean, it's kind of like you look at the sense of awe of the world when you look at you think, when you can't go. So I think we've all, there is a pent-up desire to go traveling.
Yeah.
But I think it's that's more joyful travel than kind of week in, week out work travel.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned your book, Busy, and I've learned a new word from your book that was sloppiness. And for me, sloppiness had a bad name, but why should we accept a little sloppiness in our lives?
Well, I mean, look, I talked about the behind a lot of so perfectionism is on the rise, and particularly social perfectionism. So the desire to be seen as perfect in different domains of our life, and perfectionism, while a certain amount of desire to do things well is helpful, perfectionism really strong associations with mental health issues, with anxiety, depression, and also lower levels of satisfaction. So we shouldn't aim for perfection in very many things in our lives. And there's also an association. I talked about this performing culture earlier. This all about what other people think. I think if we actually focus ourselves a little bit more on doing the right thing and making choices, it's important. And we talked about trade-offs earlier. And a consequence of trying to do a few things that really matter brilliantly means we'll probably have to accept that we can't do other things so well. So I think that as the amount of demands and communication and information get more, as we're living at home, if those of us are living at home with children running around and phones ringing and all kinds of stuff going on, and look, and a messy office behind me that's not very tidy or whatever, and notice I've tilted my screen a little bit so you don't see the chaos that sits lower than that. I think I sort of say sloppy's the new black. I think we all need to start accepting that accepting imperfection, accepting doing things to the 20% quality as opposed to 100% for everything is deeply strategic. That is the essence of strategy, is making choices for one thing rather than another. And that involves a certain degree of risk, a certain degree of discomfort. But unless we accept a bit of discomfort into our lives, we're not going to be able to innovate. We're not going to be able to have impact. We're not going to be able to have the transformational results that we would like through really focusing on the stuff that matters.
Yeah, and I guess
sloppiness is the yin of focus as yang, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we are a little bit more used to it. I guess everybody had screaming children in the background, and so maybe it helps a little bit. So,
I think we've all seen, haven't we? We've all seen things in the background that we wouldn't have seen before of people. We've worked with people for years, and all of a sudden we're seeing, and then you hear an argument going on in the background, or a furious row between my teenage son and my wife or whatever, and you think, oh no, what are people going to think of me? I've written this book about, implying that we have this perfect family and this chaos, so there's all these thoughts go on. But that's the world we're living in now, and I think we just have to give ourselves a bit of a break, and that perfection becomes a goal in itself, as opposed to the things that will make us happy. And we know there is very little connection between perfectionism or even excellence at everything. People often, some of the cultures I've worked with, talk about a culture of excellence. And I always worry about any company that has a culture of excellence, because what that means, what that gets translated as in that organization is over optimizing in everything. And what that also means is a lack of creativity and a lack of strategic focus.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And I also gained a lot from a tip from your book from Ad Kerkhoff, and it was schedule your worry time. So take 15 minutes to worry and then stop, especially in the beginning. Can you explain how that works and why it helps?
You know what, Kim, if I'm really honest, I have no idea why it works. It just sounds a crazy idea. It's one of those things, when you're looking at psychological research, that if there are certain things that come up that you think that can't possibly work. And yet he's shown time and time again, it actually does work really well. So the idea of it is, and we've all been there when you've got worries going on through your head and you kind of, we're saying, don't worry to yourself, or even worse, when someone else says, don't worry. Or that other one where you say, oh, you seem like you're in a bad mood today. It's kind of, anyway, sorry, that's a terrible thing, isn't it? Because then you think, no, I'm not, and then you are. But anyway, telling yourself not to worry just doesn't work. But it turns out we can procrastinate worry. It turns out we can say, yeah, okay, I see that I'm worried. But, I probably need to worry, but I'll do it later. I'll do it in my worry time and put it off to later. And even, what a number of people I've spoken to find, what helps them is just to jot down the worry. So they actually capture a list of worries through the day. So when it comes to worry time, they say, right, what have I got to worry about? And then worry away. Look, I've often thought about why it works so well. I could only imagine, and this is just my hunch, and I couldn't, but I can only imagine a bit like mindfulness teaches people to observe emotions, notice them, but not get hooked by them, if you like. So mindfulness is all about creating almost a space between the emotion that's happening and you, if you like. So I am not my worry. I am kind of stepped back from worry, observing it. And I suspect what's going on with the worry time is it's creating a bit of distance and therefore a bit of control over your worries. And I think probably that's why it works. But who knows? But it does.
Yeah, I really love it. And it's also because sometimes you get a little bit negative and it's just, no, my 50 minutes are over. I'm okay for the rest of the day. I really like
I'm okay till tomorrow.
Yeah. So for this podcast, lots of listeners have sent in questions and I selected a few. This is a question from Hermine. So many corporate leaders are still working at the office, while the rest of us working from home. So in a way, management hasn't experienced the benefits of working from home, and they want to go back to how it used to be. How can we get our leaders excited about these changes during COVID-19?
Yeah. One of the things that's happened is through this period is we've kind of proven that we can run businesses this way. It's almost, people that say, well, it's not going to work for us to have everyone at home is kind of proven across industry. You know what this is? I'm going to hang up this. Nothing like switching off your notifiers and distractions. Someone said you should do that. So look, there's a lot of evidence now that says it can work. And I think we've probably all proven it. So I think one thing is you can't really argue there's a business case for that. The second thing, I think anyone that wants to influence can point to that. The second thing to point to is one of the things that worries leaders is it going to impact our culture? is it going to impact our creativity? And certainly when I got deeper into with this telco, the thing that they just needed support over fundamentally is, what does it mean to be creative virtually? We've lost some of these ad hoc meetings. We've lost some of these water cooler conversations. Our meetings have become more focused. How do we build creativity? So there will be, when a lot of leaders are sitting and worried, I've had conversations with people saying, well, how do I maintain my culture? And for me, I just think, so get intentional about it, get clear about your values, get clear about, and actually use this as an opportunity to refresh that. If the concern is creativity, that what can we do about that? The other thing I'd say is, I think what very few people are looking for, whether it's a leader or an individual who've appreciated this period of lockdown, none of us are looking for, I've loved being at home and not traveling. But what I'm not looking for is to never travel again. What I'm not looking for is to never leave my home again. What leaders probably are not looking for is going back to exactly as it was, because there are such commercial, even cost benefits of more people working from home. But I think what my worry is, we end up in this kind of hybrid scenario based on practicality rather than based on attention. And I think because there's been a lot of evidence for years that people can be more individually productive at home. But of course, officers have an opportunity for the kind of ad hoc meetings, etc. And collect. So I think we probably need to get much smarter about talking about the value of working from home and the tasks that I can do best there, and the value of being in the office and the tasks that I can do best there, and then create a hybrid conversation that's grounded in attention. And I think if we do that, and if we move the narrative away from I like it at home, or it helps me to balance my life better, all of which is true, to what's best for attention and performance in the organization, it's easier for leaders to digest.
Yeah, and then it's not.
And certainly, every leader I speak to at the moment is obsessed with how do we make the hybrid reality of the future work.
Yeah.
And so actually leading into that conversation with a perspective around attention, I think is a valuable way of doing it.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. And it's not about or working at home or at the office, but maybe it's a combination. Yeah.
And getting the best from both. I've thought for years, it's crazy that we think that we can do all of our best thinking and collaboration from the same desk in the same office in the same context. There's a huge connection between cognition and context. And so moving to different locations, different environments, different buzzers helps us to think differently, helps us to harness our attention. So just being much more mindful of that will be a much smarter way of doing it.
Yeah. So that is another question from Erik. How do you make sure when you work in healthcare that you can take time for a break? For example, employees working from their cars and driving from one appointment to another and often don't take a lunch break or a break at all.
Yeah. And look, healthcare, we're also grateful for what healthcare workers have done over the last little while and continue to do. The thing is, so there was research came out soon into the lockdown, about a month into the lockdown, that on average American workers were working 3 hours more a day. In Europe, it was 2 hours more a day since the crisis started. People were taking fewer breaks. 48% of people were feeling burnout, and part of that is part of that is we've got to take responsibility for. And we'll always have a lot of demands, and particularly healthcare crumbs. They're going to be busy, but finding ways of building breaks into our day isn't a treat. It's a requirement. If we truly value the care that we're offering our patients, then we want to be present with them. We want to be able to make the best decisions. And we can only do that if we also take care of ourselves first. It's like the old adage kind of, that you hear on airplanes, you've got to put your oxygen mask on first. And to really care for patients, or care for our customers in a business context, or care for our team if we're a manager, we have to care for ourselves first. And that means prioritizing, even if it's just, and we know actually that breaks to be restorative and to be valuable don't necessarily need to be really long, but we do need to shift our attention in some way. We do need to move, get physical. We need to have a fun conversation. We need to do something that changes our kind of work mode. But without doing that, we're just not going to be offering the service or the care to others that we would like to give.
So maybe play some music in the car and go crazy about it.
Yeah, play some music, go crazy. Instead of just jumping straight in the car, if you park next to a park, walk in the park for 5 minutes before you get in the car. If it's between journeys, stop at a coffee shop and grab a quick. But kind of don't. And one of the things I'd say is, do not wait till you notice you need a break. Because we never notice we need a break. It's something about humans that we just don't notice we need a break, unless it's, to go to the bathroom. I'm always curious about the only time our children ever seem to want to go to the bathroom is when we told them lunch is ready or dinner's ready. Then all of a sudden and they've been sat there for 3 hours watching, and all of a sudden, okay, I need the toilet. But the same is true in work. It's kind of, until something forces us to stop, we don't realize how exhausted we are. And so I would pre-commit. I would kind of, if I'm finding, like Eric is suggesting, that I'm getting exhausted from all, I would look at my diary and say, right, there, and there, I'm going to build 5 minutes in, 10 minutes in, whatever, just to disconnect, just to do something nice, just to switch off. Because, we won't realize it's time to do that.
Okay. Well, this is totally different one from Anke. She says, I work for a large company in a separate innovation lab. Bringing a good idea back into the organization can be really difficult. So transferring ownership of an innovation to the parent company is really challenging. Do you perhaps have a tip for me on how we could do this better, or a way to approach it differently?
God, that's a great question. Well, and it's not the answer, but one of the problems in companies I've worked where they've got innovation labs, and then the business, that ends up being almost like a Chinese wall, like a big difference between the organizations where I've seen a good transfer of ideas across often have the innovation folk are often quite active about bringing people in early on in the project, if you like. One of the things, one of the projects I do at Microsoft, we're trying to drive a lot of change in culture, and it's a long-term project. But one of the things we've done right from the start is we got business leaders involved in the process early, and we also make sure that they're the ones that are delivering these events. So they take ownership of it, if you like, because even if at times, quite frankly, their input was irritating and threw us off track, actually getting them involved in that and helping us to shape with their input made a big. So the starting point is get people involved earlier. When it comes to the innovation, I mean, a really simple tip is make your pitches earlier in the morning. Because people are much more likely to reject and accept status quo in the afternoon, much more willing to be open to new challenging ideas in the morning. So kind of try and, if you've got a key pitch lined up for 3 or 4 in the afternoon, see if you can change it. And what else? Well, there's a couple of ideas, but it's a great question. It's probably a podcast in and of itself, that one.
Yeah. Marike, the ask question. I'm curious how you view multi-passionates. You write about choosing the most important thing, but how do you handle multiple passions? Is it possible to combine or not?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all got to choose the stuff that we want to do and choose our focus. I mean, I would consider myself multi-passionate. I think if multi-passionate, when you've got work that you love, when you've got children, when you've got kind of hobbies that you really care about, when you've got a boat, as you said, there's lots of things I'm passionate about. But if multi-passionate is everything passionate, then you've got a problem, because then you start getting superficial in lots of things. And one of the things I see a lot is people get stuck in cycles of honeymoon effect, if you like. They get into lots of different pastimes. Let's do a bit of kite surfing. Let's do a bit of paddle surfing. Let's do a bit of rock climbing. Let's do a bit of, and there's fun in all of these at the start, but they never sort of go anywhere. And I'm a big believer in the real joy that comes through sustained commitment to things over time. I think, there's a sort of an entertainment-like buzz of getting good at something and trying something at the very start. But I think the real satisfaction comes through longer-term commitment to a hobby or interest, a passion, a partner, whatever the case may be. So yes, I'm all for multi-passionate, but I'm just not for everything passionate.
Okay.
I just think we need to choose.
Great answer. So as we wrap up this podcast, I have final questions for you. Is there anything that stands out that you look at differently than you did 5 years ago?
5 years ago? Let's have a think. One of the big things that's really been, let me think. That's such a great question. 5 years ago is kind of an interesting time frame, because 5 years was when Busy came out. Was it about 5 years? One of the things I learned about myself that was quite a hard lesson to learn is when Busy came out, I felt, even to this performance, I've got a big fear of failure. I've talked about that in the book, and it's one of my things. And when Busy came out, I felt a huge pressure to be impressive. I'd get called to do keynotes or workshops, and I'd feel a huge pressure to be clever and funny and insightful and whatever. And it made me over-prepare. It effectively disconnected me from people, because I was so caught up in my desire to perform, I wasn't present enough with people. And that happened. When I get invited to to consulting assignments as well, I'd turn up and I'd want to be the man with the answer, if you like. And I think one of the things that's been big for me is getting a little better at navigating that, a little better at saying, obviously you've hired me to do something, and there's certain expectations there, but at the same time, I'm just a person, and I want to connect with the people I'm working with and be more authentic. So kind of allowing myself to not worry as much about being impressive has allowed me to be more present, either in the moment or with the people I'm working with. And that's been important. But the flip side of it is, I've got this weird thing going on where I thought 5 years ago, having written book 1, it'd be easy to write book 2. Then I spent ages working on book 2, couldn't get around. And then Corona happened. And then I wrote a book in 16 days. And I still haven't quite figured out how it took me 5 years to not write the second book. And then I managed to write the second book in 16 days on a completely different topic. And now I'm going back to the book I was writing for 5 years and still haven't written. And trying to make sense of all that. And I haven't quite figured that one out yet.
Yeah, that's really nice. So what lesson or word of wisdom would you like to put on a billboard?
Well, I go to the one we talked about earlier. Sloppy is the new black.
Yeah, that's really nice. And you already explained that one also. So now to just turn the table, what do you need help with? Or what would you like to learn from others?
I would really like to learn, and look, I would love to hear from people their experiences, their experience of the crisis, but also because the book that I struggled to write for 5 years that has now been repivoted for the post-corona is going to be about how do we make this, this post-corona world work to harness the best of attention. So I'd love to hear from people about their experiences of the crisis, but also what their hopes are for the post-corona world. That would be awesome. And by the way, if you do have any thoughts on that question and what your hopes are for, get me on mail@tonycrabbe.com.
You have been listening to the Innovation Car Wash with Tony Crabbe, author of the book Busy. Thanks for all the great questions I received for Tony Crabbe. And thanks again for all the 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts. Would you like an inside look at what I'm working on right now? Then I would like to invite you to follow me on Instagram @KimSpinder or add me on LinkedIn.